Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
After some suspicion, the husband installs hidden cameras, but for what and for whom? In today's story, we'll get to the bottom of it. Enjoy watching. Respect was something we aimed to teach our children from a young age. It wasn't just about teaching but also demonstrating it to earn it. This was a lesson I had to learn on my own, as I didn't get it from my parents. When the weather became severe, my father asked his best friend to stay with us for the winter due to the challenging driving conditions on rural roads. They moved my older sister into my bedroom since her room had 2 beds we could use. One night, I woke up to a sight involving him and my mother. The next day, when I asked her about it, she insisted it was just a dream. 2 weeks later, I witnessed them again, but this time in my parents' bed. Their relationship ultimately led to the birth of my younger sister. To shield herself, my mother labeled me the family scapegoat. My father raised my half-sister as his own but turned to alcohol to cope with the pain. I quickly learned that, for many people, honesty didn't hold much value. It did for me, and to this day, I can't stand dishonesty. I've never defended those who lie, which sometimes made me come across as harsh to those who knew me. My only son learned the hard way that avoiding communication with me was the worst choice he could make. Talking to his mother turned minor issues into major problems. If she confided in me first, they would escalate. She knew how to manipulate situations, and it was a difficult couple of years for him, but eventually, he opened up. He realized that taking responsibility was essential. As he was about to turn 16 and wanted his first car, he was the eldest of 3. My youngest daughter brought home a bad cold, which she kindly shared with me. I woke up coughing, flipping through TV channels for something interesting when I stumbled upon a new type of camera used by law enforcement. I messaged a friend to ask if there were any models that could automatically forward video to a preset email address. 2 days later, he informed me about a product that did just that, albeit at a high price and only functional with a free Wi-Fi connection. I ended up spending over $2,000 on 3 cameras and had them delivered to my office along with a new laptop I ordered for personal use. My role at an advertising firm involved overseeing commercial shoots, often requiring me to be on location for several days. The company's main shareholders were twin brothers, one openly gay and the other straight, named Robert and Stephen Walker. Stephen, known for his charm with women, never married, and we got along well. I had worked with them for years and was making a comfortable salary, so life was good. If my wife needed company while I was away, Robert would often be the one to accompany her, which helped improve his public image. David Peters delivered the cameras to me on a Friday afternoon, adding a few additional items for consideration. He advised me to set up a cloud mailbox for sending videos, which I did. The cameras were discreet, no larger than earrings, and were motion activated. He installed one in a set of earrings that could run for up to a week before needing a wireless recharge. When a signal was detected, all my wife had to do was remove them and place them back in their box. Each camera had its unique identification number, which was included with every video sent. When David asked why I needed them, I explained that my instincts told me something was off, but I didn't know what. I wanted to confirm that my suspicions were unfounded. I was scheduled to fly out Sunday evening for a work trip. On Sunday, I gifted my wife Deborah, whom I had been married to for nearly 18 years, a pair of diamond earrings that dangled elegantly. She adored them and promised to wear them constantly while I was away. Before heading to the airport, I stopped by the office to gather a few essentials, which allowed me to leave notes for both my bosses, letting them know I would reach out if any issues arose. I placed one of the cameras in each of their offices to monitor their desks continuously, and they were connected to the necessary sources. I flew from New York to Whistler on the west coast of British Columbia, Canada, because we were scheduled to shoot a new snowboard commercial for 2 weeks. Fortunately, there was still snow on the upper peaks. I'm not a big person, just 5 feet 9 inches, about 175 centimeters, and 166 pounds, about 75 kilograms, with a 32-inch waist, about 81 centimeters. Deborah always jokes that I should wear baby socks, as her wrists are thicker than mine. We are the same height, so she usually avoids wearing heels around me. She has an attractive figure and still draws attention from many men, but she always turns them down. While our intimacy had slowed down while I was home, It remained fairly regular, and it seemed our children had taken after our family, so I had no reason to doubt. As a precaution, and because we lived in the city, we agreed to do DNA tests on our children and took their fingerprints to keep in case of emergencies. On Wednesdays, while I practiced karate, she went to the theater. Otherwise, we spent all our free time together. Fridays were reserved for dinner and dancing, as we both loved to dance. Whenever possible, we devoted our weekends to our children. Deborah ran her own interior design business from home, which provided a good income, and she had a call answering service when she was away. There were times when we both felt overwhelmed and were away from home, but our parents helped us, leading to strong relationships between our children and their grandparents. On Monday evening, I started reviewing the information sent to me after submitting my daily report on the provided laptop. I then opened my personal account and found 3 messages. The first thing that caught my attention was a heated exchange between Stephen and Robert. "I'm fed up with being your muse so you can spend time with Deborah," Robert said. "This isn't fun anymore. God, if Glenn ever finds out, we're in trouble. He does the work of 3 people, and without him, we could lose millions. Do you know how many customers we would lose to our competitors? You need to stop this right now." "I can't," Stephen replied. "I love her, and according to Deborah, their 3 children are mine." "Jesus, you're an idiot," Robert retorted. "I'm contacting our corporate lawyer to figure out how to protect the firm. If the truth comes out, we're all finished. Glenn will destroy us, and he would have every right to." I rushed to the bathroom, feeling sick. I called my older cousin Gordon, a highly paid divorce attorney, waking him up. He was not pleased when I told him what I had discovered. He instructed me to send him all the video clips I received so he could start working on the case. The first step was to obtain a DNA sample from Stephen Walker. While the video recordings themselves couldn't be used as evidence, transcripts of conversations could. He also asked for a copy of my company's HR manual and for me to find a notary to fax him the power of attorney. "I'll contact the private investigator we're working with tomorrow," he said. "They'll figure out when, where, and how. It's good that you're in Canada. Your absence will make things easier since their guard will be down. If all goes well, handing them the documents before your return should be ideal." I replied that my trip would be a little less than 2 weeks, but it could take longer. The next morning, I called my assistant, who managed everything I needed during filming, and asked her to confidentially forward the manual to my cousin's office. Nora agreed, saying, "I think you finally learned the truth." After confirming, she assured me she would stay silent for now but was ready to testify in my favor if necessary, indicating that management was aware of the situation all along. I then contacted our family doctor's office to explain that I needed copies of my children's DNA for the lawyers because I was updating my will. I paid for the service with my credit card. One of the Canadians working with us was able to arrange for a notary. For the rest of the week, I forwarded the videos, knowing my cousin would handle the details. I spent my free time fighting the urge to go to a bar and drown my sorrows. Now I understood my father's pain. On Friday, after preparing everything for the weekend, I took a helicopter to Vancouver and then flew all night back to New York. After renting a car, I parked on the street near my house. I was surprised to see my wife's parents taking our 3 children. Half an hour later, Deborah emerged, impeccably dressed in high heels and a new dress that hugged her figure. As soon as she left, I turned off the alarm and went into my office to retrieve what I referred to as 16 years' worth of journals, which recorded the dates of each trip and what happened during them. These journals had legally saved me more than once. An hour later, I was at Gordon's, sitting in his kitchen, discussing what he had learned. A DNA sample had been obtained from Stephen, and we were awaiting the comparison results of the comparison. They also discovered a penthouse that the two had co-owned for 22 years. Neighbors believed they were common-law partners and had evidence that they were present so frequently that it seemed they worked on weekends and nights. They hired a cleaning service twice a week and had sworn statements confirming their relationship status even before I met Deborah. Her company's only client was an LLC that bought and sold affordable apartments, renovated them, and sold them as furnished units to new buyers at inflated prices. This company was wholly owned by Stephen Walker. Corporate tax filings indicated that Deborah earned more than $500,000 a year after deductions but took home less than $880,000. My children may not be biologically mine, but were they Stephen's children? This remained to be seen. Since Deborah had deceived me, could she have done the same with Stephen? Gordon mentioned that my mother was taking the kids the following weekend because I wasn't expected home until Monday at the earliest. We agreed that we would need to address the situation concerning her partner in the company once she was in her primary residence. I planned to remove whatever I deemed necessary from the house. I told him I would return on Friday evening, and he would block all joint cards and empty half of our accounts before they could be frozen by court order upon my return. I returned to Canada to finish filming, working twice as hard. Robert Walker met me at the airport when I disembarked the following Saturday morning. He was surprised I finished filming early and confused about why our meeting couldn't wait until Monday. While we talked over coffee about the trip and the editing department's needs, a man approached him and asked if he was Robert Walker. Robert confirmed his identity, and the man informed him of a legal notification. Before Robert could say anything, I handed him my laptop, company keys, credit cards, and pulled my resignation letter from my jacket. I then explained that his brother and my wife were also receiving notifications. His face turned pale, and he asked how serious the situation was. I replied that I had DNA confirming that Stephen is the biological father of all of Deborah's children, and notifications were being sent to their shared residence right now, reminding them that they are legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of my mother, children, and me. I thought Robert was about to faint. I got up to leave, and Robert, in a fit of anger, lunged at me before airport security intervened. I defended myself, but he left with significant injuries. My mother and children greeted me when I arrived and opened the garage. It was difficult to explain to my daughters and their brother that I was not their biological father. My mom lost her composure when I told them their mother was now with the man who fathered them, indicating that their relationship predated our marriage. I told them they would stay with me until the court made a decision after their interviews. The court would consider all three parents' relationships with them before the judge ruled. All three were devastated, as was I. My mother heard someone attempting to open the door and went to investigate. I cautioned her that the external alarm was still activated, so I called the police to report a potential break-in. They informed me they were already responding to a silent alarm. I then sent the children upstairs. They opened the outer door to find Stephen attempting to break in through a window on the heavy metal door, trying to remove the chain when the police arrived. After detaining the intruders, the police officer introduced himself. I opened the door to see Stephen and Deborah handcuffed in the back of a patrol car. When he mentioned that she claimed to live there, I handed him a copy of the protective order that had been served earlier that morning. He smiled and indicated that they were both going to face the judge. My mother finally accepted that what she did to me all those years ago was wrong. It took witnessing what I was facing for her to understand the true cost, not just to me but to her grandchildren. "I'm no better than Deborah," she said. "Your father forgave me, but he was never the same. If he hadn't died in that accident, I can't say we wouldn't be where you are now." Photos of Deborah and Stephen were on the front page of the New York Post the next morning as they were escorted to the police station. I gave the court reporter a detailed account of what was happening, stating that I had to leave the firm because of Stephen's long-term involvement with my wife. This would be published on Monday. A DNA comparison report between my children and the Walker brothers proved they were related. The board of directors would consider the implications of this matter. Carl and Carla Matthews, my children, and I had a late Sunday dinner at a local restaurant, then they followed us back to our home. Their grandmother put my daughters to bed so my father-in-law and I could talk in my home office. "Dad," I said, "Deborah and Stephen's relationship started before I even met Deborah. I found out about it when I was in Canada." I then showed him a video clip of Robert and Stephen talking. He shook his head in disbelief. It was clear he had no idea. Next, I showed him the documents for the purchase of the penthouse, completed 2 years before our marriage. The apartment was still registered in her maiden name. "Unbelievable," Carl exclaimed. "The day you got married, this was already happening." I explained that after seeing this clip, I hired a lawyer and a private investigator. Both said it was straightforward to uncover the truth because they thought they had hidden it so well. "I will not let what happens in my life affect your relationship with your grandchildren," I assured him, handing over copies of court documents and background materials. While he read, I poured us both a large glass of Irish whiskey on the rocks. What hurt him most was reading the conversation where Deborah openly admitted to a mutual friend how easily she had manipulated the situation with Stephen, deciding that I would raise his children. From the moment Glenn first met me, I knew he would do anything for me. His affection blinded him to the truth. Stephen saw Glenn's knack for detail, which made him the ideal person to supervise projects. The cost of reshoots dropped by 80% when Glenn took over, Stephen had remarked, leading to the company's improved reputation and profits. Glenn thought our family life was perfect and never suspected anything wrong. "I'll file for divorce and use an escort service to frame him," Deborah had laughed. I returned to find my father-in-law in tears. "How did you find all this out?" Carl asked seriously. I opened my laptop, logged into my email, and accessed the latest version from Deborah's camera. I opened the video file and let it play. "This is a mess," Deborah said. "I don't know how Glenn found out. He claims you are the father, but there's no proof, so it's just nonsense from his lawyer trying to build a case." "True," Stephen replied, "but Glenn did resign and serve Robert on Saturday. Will he serve at the corporate event tomorrow? If he does, it'll be a shame. I need to figure out what to tell the board," Stephen continued. "I have to move my personal belongings out of the house and find a divorce lawyer. I need to make it look like Glenn is the one being unfaithful, not me, and that you're just a friend helping me. Do you think they'll buy it?" "At the end of the day, we both know your children are mine," Deborah responded confidently. "They've never accused me of anything, so their trust in me is solid. If I have any doubts, I'll start crying," she added. "My tears always affect them because I've always been a daddy's girl." "What about our 3 children? Do you want them to take my last name after we get married?" Stephen asked. Hearing this, I turned off the video, nearly in tears. Deborah's diamond earrings have a built-in camera that charges wirelessly and transmits via Wi-Fi whenever they're full. As long as they're charged and have a signal, the information will be transmitted as long as she wears them. Carla slipped in and joined us. I offered her a glass of wine, and when she accepted, I left them to discuss the situation. I returned just in time to see Carl replay the conversation we had heard. Carla's face said it all. "Mom," she said, tears in her eyes, "so what's written in the divorce document is true? She was unfaithful?" "Longer than their marriage," Dad replied. "Our grandchildren were conceived by our daughter and Stephen. I've seen copies of the DNA report. My daughter Deborah is dead to me. She has turned her back on everything our family has ever stood for. I can't forget the time and the lies she spun. It's clear she feels no remorse, even after being discovered. It makes me wonder how many times we took the children away so she could be with her partner. But they are our grandchildren," Carl said, crying. "I don't want to lose them. Mom, if I get custody, you will always have unlimited access to them," I told Dad, calming her worries. "But I suggest you both seek a court order for unrestricted access to your grandchildren, regardless of who wins custody. You'll need to file a lawsuit against all 3 of us, but I believe it's the wisest course of action. You can tell Deborah that until everything is resolved, you refuse to take sides. Don't let your emotions close doors that you can't reopen later." Carl looked at me and nodded in agreement. Our brother-in-law Glenn will always be family to me. His perspective on this matter is valuable. He was hurting just as much as we were, but he prioritized our needs, said Carl. As far as we know, she and her partner don't seem concerned about their children at all. Our daughter has been dishonest with us her entire adult life. Where did we go wrong? When Deborah told us she loved Glenn, was she being truthful? Mom said Monday was a busy day for me. I drove my 3 children to school and then spent time at the office explaining the situation. If my wife had attempted to contact the children at school, the authorities would have intervened. My soon-to-be ex had found herself a high-priced divorce lawyer, and my former employer's firm received the necessary documentation. My father-in-law filed a lawsuit against both Deborah and me on Wednesday. He said his daughter was distraught and demanded he withdraw the lawsuit. He told her that he and her mother were unsure what to believe but felt their relationship with their grandchildren needed protection. He asked her why she was prohibited from seeing the children, but she refused to answer. He then revealed that I suggested they pursue legal action after our family dinner on Sunday night. "Now we understand why you weren't invited," he said. He insisted we promise to take legal action because he didn't want our relationship with our grandchildren to hinge on the actions of their parents. He provided us with the address of the penthouse, which is how we learned where to notify you. According to city records, you co-own it with Glenn's boss, which adds credibility to his claims. Deborah became angry and hung up. This conversation revealed a lot about human nature. When faced with the truth, it often retreats. Fortunately, Friday was the last day of school before spring break, so my in-laws, my 3 kids, my mom, and I went to Disney World for a week, flying out on Saturday and returning a week later. This trip had been planned weeks in advance, but I couldn't get a refund for Deborah's ticket. Gordon persuaded Deborah to sign a waiver for her share of the house, leading her to believe it wouldn't be considered a marital asset in the divorce. She didn't realize her corporation would still be included because she operated it from home, and our residence served as her business address. Walker's advertising management accepted the terms of my departure. Thus, until my sick and vacation days were used up, I remained an employee of the company, giving me until the end of June to decide my next steps. When I returned, my former assistant Nora informed me that the board of directors was allowing me time to regroup before attempting to engage with me again. They recognized my value to the firm and began to hear murmurs from clients wondering if I would return. Although the Walker brothers owned significant shares, the corporate structure allowed them to be removed for cause and compelled by the board to sell their shares. Gordon granted Deborah access to the garage, where we moved all of her personal belongings while we were away. After duplicating her corporation's paperwork, including bank records, he hired a team of financial experts to calculate the expenses of raising our children from the date of conception of the eldest child. Using a semi-annual interest rate, he divided each year's cost by 3 and estimated Stephen Walker's share of my obligations, doubling it for undue stress and anxiety, then adding interest to reflect current values. I also filed a lawsuit against both brothers for interfering with my marriage, using grounds of infidelity against my wife. The kids had just returned from school after their first day when there was a knock on our door. It was a social worker investigating a complaint about my caregiving. I discovered it came from my soon-to-be ex-wife's lawyer. My son Carl led her into the kitchen, where she found me and my daughters preparing dinner together, the roast cooking in the oven. When she explained her purpose for being there, I suggested she look around the cabinets, refrigerator, and freezer while I continued peeling the potatoes. After she did what I asked, I offered her a cup of coffee and pulled out 2 large mugs. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name," I said. "Tricia Marsh," she replied. I asked her to call me by my first name and then suggested that if she had time, she could interview my children now, as I assumed the court would arrange it. Since dinner would be ready in an hour, we'd love for her to join us if she could. She agreed, and my son Carl took her into the living room to talk while Tina and Terry helped me. After a pleasant dinner, Tricia spoke with my daughters for quite a while. Carl and I washed the dishes together. None of the kids had done their homework, so I wrote them notes explaining why, in case anyone asked. Finally, Tricia and I were able to talk privately. The first thing I did was show her the chat between Stephen and Deborah. "For 16 years, you had no idea," Tricia said. "It seems they planned it all. She wanted children, and he didn't, so they chose you to raise his children." "That's about how I see it," I said. "It makes me wonder if I ever knew the person I married." I'll add to my notes that the marriage was built on her lies. The fact that they orchestrated all of this raises questions about whether they truly cared for the children. Tricia explained, "It seems like you and the kids are just an inconvenience for them. Your wife's lawyer is trying to make it appear as though you don't care about your children, but everything I've seen and heard contradicts that. I was surprised to hear that you told the children that Stephen was their biological father. It's good to see that all 3 of you have made it clear that they want to stay with you. Are you listed as the father on their birth certificates?" "Yes," I replied. "Will this be important?" "Very important. This proves that you didn't know and acted as if the children were yours all along. This will carry significant weight in the eyes of the court when making a custody decision." Tricia said, "I'll give you my email address so you can send me this clip. The judge needs to see it. Situations like yours strengthen my conviction to avoid marriage." "I can't change the past," I said with a smile. "Besides, I love my children, no matter who their biological parents are." They may not share my genes, but everything else about them is me. I like your perspective, Tricia said. I'll have to investigate your soon-to-be ex's residence and interview them both, but right now, the odds are in your favor. The judge will consider this in his report. I wrote, Glenn Allen James was chosen by Deborah because he was good enough to be the father of her children while they were growing up, but not good enough to be their biological father. Mr. James received legal proof that Mrs. James was in a common-law relationship with Mr. Stephen Walker before and during their marriage. We chatted for a few more hours, maintaining light conversation and exchanging phone numbers to stay in touch. She was surprised that Deborah hadn't attempted to contact the children since the notification on Sunday, and she noted this. I later learned that she called a detective friend to find out if a crime had been committed. He said there was but suggested consulting the district attorney first to see if they wanted to pursue the case. I was fortunate there was an election next year, and the DA would be running. I didn't realize then what a huge storm was brewing around my situation. I woke up Tuesday morning and got busy getting the kids ready for school. I was surprised when Tricia asked me to send the videotape I showed her to the assistant district attorney. I did even better. I emailed him all the clips and promised to send him any new ones that appeared. 3 hours later, they called me back. I was surprised when he explained that the court had already issued a warrant so that whatever I provided could be used legally in a criminal court without my name being revealed. It was a critical moment that all the clips came from an email address, making it seem like it was coming from a third party. He was going to build a case to charge them both with extortion, one charge for each year they had been running their scheme on my children and me. I hoped the charges would be filed before I had to go to divorce court. When the kids got back, we ordered pizza and had an early dinner because I wanted to catch the local evening news. The local CBS affiliate covered the whole story. Deborah and Stephen were detained for questioning as they left the restaurant after dinner. For the next hour, I answered calls and explained that I didn't know what was happening. The rest of the week passed quietly, or at least I thought so. Later, I found out I was wrong. On Wednesday, I was seen entering the office building of my former employer's competitor. Nobody knew I was meeting a friend for lunch. The gossip pages of the next day's morning paper mentioned that I was in talks with senior management to accept the position. I called the author of the article and said that if she went back to the old notes, she might mistakenly name the twin with whom my wife was at the theater, noting the words date night. She asked me how my meeting went, and I replied that my attorney advised me not to comment at this time. Then things got interesting. I dropped the kids off at school and had just gotten home Friday morning when Deborah got out of her car as I walked along the street. She was wearing a t-shirt and blue jeans, her face looked sad and exhausted, and she was without makeup. It was unusual for her to leave the house like that. Seeing her in this state reminded me to check my new computer to see what the cameras had captured. I walked to the side of the road. Glenn, Deborah said, my parents don't even want to talk to me. They told me not to contact them until I resolved the mess I created. My siblings told me the same thing. I want to see the children. As far as I know, you haven't even called them. I called them that Sunday. They all said they didn't want to talk to me and hung up. I think they might have calmed down now, Deborah said. I have a lot of explaining to do. I will talk to my attorney about setting up supervised meetings. Nothing more, I said coldly. I will also inform him that you violated the restraining order. Thank you, she replied. Deborah, you and I need to sit down and talk about all this. There's nothing to discuss. We can prove that the only reason you got married was that Stephen didn't want to take on the responsibility of raising his children. That's why you needed someone else to take his place, and that's why you and he chose me, I said sternly. Our whole marriage was a lie. No one would do what you did out of love. How long did you two laugh at me? I guess congratulations are in order since I heard that you and Stephen planned to get married as soon as we get divorced. Throughout my tirade, her expression didn't change. Her response spoke volumes. We are not together. Stephen had to find a new place to live. We were both notified of a restraining order against each other while being interviewed by detectives until the investigation was completed. Now he has to stay in a hotel, Deborah said. My attorney made a mistake by filing a complaint against you with Child Protective Services. They interviewed us. The condominium management company is demanding that we sell the unit. The kids and I were interviewed on Monday. I explained that the interviewer had private conversations with each of us, so I don't know what they told her. Children are at an age when the court will allow them to choose who to live with. They'll be with your parents this weekend. Without saying goodbye, I turned around and entered the house. Taking the laptop, I went to the kitchen. After brewing fresh coffee, I opened it. I had learned a lot since Monday. The HR representative used Roger's office to conduct one-on-one interviews with management from top to bottom. It was disheartening to find out how many people laughed at me behind my back. Many were terminated for cause. This was a godsend for my attorney and the district attorney. It was revealed that Stephen often used bribery, promotions, and intimidation to keep his relationship a secret. All these actions were punishable by law. The board of directors and the CEO met late Thursday after most employees had left work. The council was given complete information about who knew what, when, and why everything happened, including interviews with former employees. They discussed what to do with Stephen and Robert. Stephen was stripped of his position as president of the firm, and Roger was suspended. The head of HR informed the CEO that I had been seen entering a commercial building and that reliable sources, a gossip reporter, confirmed that I had been approached by competitors. The CEO smiled and said, "But can they offer him the position of president?" The head of HR picked up the phone, explaining that she was going to find out if Nora was still working. The CEO asked why Nora was significant. She was Glenn's assistant and knew him better than anyone, so she could have an idea of his thoughts. Then it dawned on me, according to state laws, a civil marriage that has existed for more than a year is considered official. I picked up the phone and called the DA's office. I explained my idea, and he liked it. According to the law, Deborah could be charged with bigamy if their relationship was proven. I gave them Gordon's office number and told them to ask him for copies of all our documents. 2 hours later, Gordon called me. "Damn it, Glenn, I didn't notice it, but I should have. This is brilliant. Your divorce is a grand slam, and Deborah will be held accountable." Within hours, George Davidson, who was leading the investigation, said, "You brought the question up. I withdraw your divorce suit. Instead, we are now seeking an annulment because she was legally already married. All that remains is to iron out the details." "It will be easy," I said. "If Deborah ends up in jail," Gordon laughed. "It's interesting that with all their plans and schemes, their own actions will lead to their downfall, strengthening our other claims. By the way, wait until I post the rest of what I found. Call the DA's office to see if your wiretap permit can be extended. If possible, it will save me thousands in legal fees." I said to indicate in the next letter that he will not provide evidence of criminal acts. "It may not be necessary," I asked. "Can she be assigned to pay your legal expenses?" Gordon replied, "Glenn, are you serious? I have copies of confessions from employees and former employees about what Stephen did to conceal his common-law marriage. I'll send them to you too," I said. I went back to my laptop and opened a clip featuring the CEO, CFO, and head of HR. They all agreed that I had a compelling case. They could try to protect themselves from him, but the publicity and interest in the case would ruin their reputation. They agreed to try to settle it as inexpensively as possible. Within 5 minutes, the DA's office and my lawyer received all the video clips I had emailed. Nora called me. "Hello, stranger. Long time no see. How are you?" she said. "Glenn, this is a complete mess. There isn't a single department that isn't affected. The HR department is conducting individual interviews with everyone. They had a notary come to witness and confirm. We've lost some good people, some were let go, and others left on their own," Nora said. Stephen and Robert were called in after meeting with the CEO. Security allowed Stephen to collect his items from his desk before escorting him out. Robert was told he was being suspended from all duties until his future was decided. "Is your job safe?" I asked. "In my resignation letter, I stated that you were the most qualified to fill my position. They told me that right now I am acting as interim. A final decision won't be made until the council finds a new president. The only thing they told me was that the person they are interested in has a situation that needs to be resolved. My gut tells me it's you. After all, Stephen and Robert never did anything without consulting you first. Well, they learned it the hard way at a great cost. Half the time, they heard but didn't listen. I simplified processes by focusing on what truly mattered, ignoring the frills that our clients often thought were important. When they saw the final product, they were happy with the results, I said. My phone hasn't stopped ringing since I left, but I'm not agreeing to anything yet. Thank you, Glenn. You told me what I wanted to know without saying much. Are you still open to coming back? Said Nora. Depends, I laughed. Can you email me the gossip reporter's address if you have one? No problem, but I'll text it to you, Nora replied, using an email address that no one knew. I sent all the video clips unrelated to my divorce to a gossip reporter. Every little detail she could extract from them would go public in print without naming names. She wrote in such a way that there was no doubt about who she was talking about. The writer was a master of her craft. My son came running from the living room while I was preparing dinner. Dad, Mom's on the early news. I went in and rewound to see what was happening. She was escorted in handcuffs. The next shot showed a representative announcing that she had been charged with a serious offense. Could she go to jail on this charge if she is found guilty? Asked Carl. Yes, this is considered a crime in our state. How long she will stay depends on the judge, I replied. My father always told me if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. It stopped me from doing a lot of foolish things when I was your age. How long will they keep her? Asked my son. Until she gets in front of a judge and can post bail. Depending on the department, she may already be free. Carl and Carla took the children on Saturday. The boys would go to a monster truck show, and the girls would be playing 2 soccer games. I needed to get out of the house. I can't believe it, said Carl. Deborah has been arrested for a serious crime. She could get up to 10 years depending on the judge. I know, Dad, and this is not the end, I answered. It appears her partner used questionable tactics to keep their relationship hidden. The DA obtained video evidence from some of Stephen's victims. I felt sorry for Carl because his daughter must have torn his heart out. Suddenly, I was left alone. I shouldn't have been, as I was mentally and emotionally drained. I wondered if this is what they call hitting rock bottom. I sat on the stairs and cried, and my body wouldn't let me stop. Some say that this kind of release is a form of healing or adjustment. If this is healing, then what is suffering? The human body and its emotions are fragile. No matter what we plan, we cannot control when and how emotions will find their own release. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a local park, throwing unsalted nuts to squirrels, not knowing what to do. Most people don't realize how lonely divorce can be. Those whom you considered friends distance themselves for their own protection, others because they don't know what to believe. Then there's the difference between being single while all your friends are married. Being single meant you no longer fit in many situations. I was lost in my thoughts, completely unprepared for what was happening around me. I didn't notice the person who sat down at the other end of the bench until they spoke. I saw you sitting here and watched for a while. It's clear that the squirrels seem to be your best friends. I was curious if you realized this and how you were coping. Glenn, it looks like I found out, Trisha Marsh said. Blue melancholy is tough, isn't it? You need to find your own way to shake it off. Easier said than done, I replied. I'm learning that divorce is something you have to go through alone. Most of your friends avoid you like you have the plague. Come on, let me buy you some coffee, Trisha offered. No talk about business. Okay, I agreed. I learned that Trisha was going shopping, so I joined her. It was interesting to discover her tastes in food. She bought mostly frozen prepared meals for herself because, with no one to cook for, she lost interest. I knew my mother had been that way. Unfortunately, their diet often suffered as a result. As I carried a basket of groceries, I selected a few items when we reached the deli counter. I asked the clerk for 12 fresh wontons and a quarter pound of barbecue duck. I hope you like wonton soup, I said, because that's what I'm making for dinner. If you're okay with it, that works for me since we're only 2 blocks from my apartment, Trisha said. After washing the vegetables, she watched me cut them into equal portions. I mentioned I was using chicken broth because the wontons I chose contained more pork than beef. I then sliced the pre-chopped duck similarly. She took out 2 pans. I filled one with water and a little salt, the other with broth. Once the broth was boiling, I added corn, water chestnuts, spices, and duck, saving the red, yellow, and green peppers and snow peas for last. When the salted water came to a boil, I added the wontons to cook them. Once they were done, I added the fresh vegetables to the soup and poured 2 cups of soy sauce on top. After tasting it, I added some garlic powder. Finally, I added the wontons to soak up the flavor of the soup before serving. As soon as Trisha tasted the first spoonful, she was hooked. I made enough for several servings, hoping she could reheat the rest as we talked. She learned that I prefer to make my own wontons in large batches and freeze them. I also explained a trick, to use slightly less broth and add cornstarch as a thickener to make a stew that can be served with rice. When she found out how much I spent, she was shocked. I left her in a good mood. Trisha accepted me for who I am. Surprisingly, this was exactly what I needed all this time. Recognizing who you are means a lot, and today moved mountains. On Sunday, while reading the morning newspaper, I noticed that a gossip reporter had published a 2-page article about the former president's ongoing efforts to maintain power and control over his personal situation. This included things like promotions, manipulation, and unethical practices. She ended with the question, "Is this being investigated? And if not, why not?" I sent Trisha a message asking if she wanted to spend the day with me at Kai Island. She agreed, and we acted like teenagers on our first date. I wondered why she had never married. She explained that her career always got in the way, constantly having to call into work in the middle of something had derailed relationships several times. I could understand it from both sides, given what my career had done to my marriage. My in-laws and children were surprised by my good mood when I met them for Sunday dinner. Everyone commented that they hadn't seen me this happy for several weeks. Nora called on Monday morning to let me know that I could expect a quick visit from the chairman of the board to begin negotiations for my return. The article that appeared in the Sunday newspaper forced them to act because everyone knew who it was writing about. Nora said the board was going to take legal action to force the sale of Stephen and Robert's shares since they refused to sell after being let go. An unexpected call came from Deborah, requesting a private meeting in a neutral location without cell phones. I asked her to give me 10 minutes to think and call me back. I called Gordon, who said that sometimes the best place to have a private conversation is in the middle of a crowd where people can move freely. As a result, I met Deborah at the Nathan's Hot Dog stand in the park at 1 p.m. We found a bench, took out our phones, and turned them off, leaving them in plain sight. "What do you want?" I asked coldly. "I need to know if you know who is doing this to Stephen and me," Deborah said bluntly. "The gossip journalist is pushing the police, almost leading them. The corporation that Stephen founded kicked him out. Robert thinks he's being kicked out too, and now you've filed for annulment. Well, Stephen's problems seem to come from the board of directors. I was told that this is where information is coming from to the police. This led them to discover facts and witnesses to events," I said. "I can't discuss anything related to our case because my lawyer doesn't want me to." "Then why did you agree to meet me?" Deborah asked. "You know that we've dug a huge hole for ourselves. I heard that Miss Marsh submitted her report to the court late last week. We've been informed that all the children want to stay with you. I have to agree with what Stephen and I are facing now. Another lawyer says I could face serious consequences if the judge decides I was legally married to Stephen. It all comes down to interpretation about whether this is considered a marriage since we don't have a marriage certificate. I will need to tell the children that I saw you today," I replied. "They'll ask my opinion about what you look like." "How are they coping emotionally?" Deborah asked, genuinely concerned. "They have their moments. It can be tough because I can't explain or answer their questions," I said. "What questions?" Deborah asked, perhaps hoping for a chance to come back into their lives. "Why did they deserve this situation?" I answered, reflecting that even I sometimes wondered about it. "You should write a book about being married to 2 men for almost 20 years and make it as captivating as possible. It would likely be a bestseller." With that, I got up and left. Deborah was always thinking of herself first. She was like an old dog too set in her ways to change. Even worse, I couldn't feel sorry for her because I realized that all my remaining feelings had faded. I returned home and checked my email, surprised to find a video of our conversation. Deborah's voice and my words were clear and precise. I forwarded it to the gossip reporter, a big smile on my face. On Tuesday, a gossip column reported in large print that Deborah James, accused of bigamy, was planning to write a tell-all book about her 18 years with 2 husbands. This news made Carl and Carla Matthews even angrier because their daughters seemed proud of what she had done. Gordon called me on Wednesday evening with good news. It was a successful day in court. The judge agreed that, under state law, she was already married to Stephen at the time of our marriage. Since our marriage was not legal, an annulment was granted. This gave him some flexibility in asset allocation. Although Deborah's lawyer fought hard, the judge ruled that since her first spouse was not named in this divorce and it was part of a scam, I would receive my share. I was given temporary sole custody until her legal issues were resolved, but I had to give her unrestricted access to the children. Stephen Walker was arrested on Friday, and suddenly many of those he had mistreated over the years found themselves in a position where they needed to cooperate with the DA's office. Deborah's life took a turn for the worse. A few months ago, she had 2 companions keeping her warm at night. Now she had no one. I was busy landscaping around the house when the chairman of the board of directors showed up. "We need to have a serious one-on-one talk about this situation, Glenn." "I hope you've had enough time," Bill Burrows said. I stood up and offered Bill my hand. He shook it. "It was never about the company," I said. "It was all about the people in it." A huge smile appeared on his face. "Thank you. That's what I needed to hear. Let's see if we can do something." We went into my kitchen and started discussing my situation. I learned a few things, and so did Bill. What impressed me most was his honesty. He didn't hide anything. It was gratifying to hear that once they filed suit to force the sale of their shares, the brothers agreed to exchange their common stock for preferred stock, effectively stripping them of their voting rights in the company. I told him that was one of my concerns. He went through each layoff one by one and explained why and who left. I expressed my desire to try to get some of them back if I returned, as they were caught in a situation like I was. You can't blame people for something they didn't know. I was surprised by the amount offered on behalf of the firm to settle the claim. I called Gordon, who spoke to Bill, and I told Gordon to accept it. After that, Bill pulled out a contract for the position of president of the company and handed it to me. "I know you won't sign anything until your lawyer gets the settlement check," Bill said. "While you're waiting for this process to complete, study this. I think you'll be pleased." After he left, I was surprised by the timing. We talked for more than 3 hours. I called Tricia, hoping she wasn't busy that night. She was available, so I asked if she wanted to join my family for a celebratory dinner. "What are we celebrating?" she asked. "My divorce, gaining custody, settling a lawsuit against my former firm, and my eventual return to work." She agreed, and I made a reservation at a restaurant with a small private room for 8 o'clock in the evening. I called my in-laws, my mother, my sister, and her husband, all of whom agreed to come. I asked my sister to bring her children. I called Tricia to say I'd pick her up at 7 o'clock. On the way to Tricia's, I stopped at the store to buy a mix of red and yellow roses and ferns in a cute vase to thank her for everything she did. The kids teased me on the way to her house, discussing what they liked about her. I left the kids in the car as I walked up to her apartment. After she let me in, Tricia admired the flowers and looked stunning. She wore a cute summer yellow dress, and her blue eyes sparkled with surprise. She was clearly prepared to make a good impression, and she did. "Since you brought flowers, does that mean you consider this our first date?" Tricia said with a laugh. I didn't know what to say, and when I tried to speak, I faltered. Tricia smiled and took my hand, holding it. "It's been a long time since I made a man speechless," she said with a grin. "I'll take that as a yes. I won't forget that moment to this day." We got into the car, and the kids started telling her about my custody win. I shared who else was coming to the celebration. "Wow, meeting the family on our first official date," Tricia exclaimed. My oldest daughter, Tammy, who takes after Grandma Carla, said she loved the flowers her dad bought for her. Tricia showed her the picture she had taken, which became her background screen. Thanks to traffic, we arrived 10 minutes late. I had pre-ordered 2 bottles of the best medium champagne. Before I could introduce her, my youngest daughter said, "Everyone, this is Trisha Marsh, our dad's girlfriend," and Trisha and I burst out laughing. This set a joyful mood for the evening. Over dinner, I explained the court's decision and its rulings to everyone. I then discussed the upcoming settlement of the lawsuit against the firm and the removal of Robert and Stephen Walker from their positions. The latest news was that I was offered the position of president. Trisha explained that she was a social services representative called to investigate a complaint against me, and that's how we met. Carl stood up with a glass of champagne in hand. "After everything you've been through, Glenn, Carla and I were worried you would cut us out of your life. Instead, you brought us closer. Congratulations. You're finally getting the respect you deserve." A toast to Glenn for being who he is and to Trisha for making him happy again. As we were all getting ready to leave, Carl pulled me aside and told me they were taking the kids for the weekend. They used their keys to get everything they need. "Don't waste time on the past, start building your new life." I asked Trisha if she liked the dance, and off we went. I took her home at 3 o'clock in the morning, agreeing to pick her up at noon. We spent most of the weekend together. On Monday morning, after sending the kids off to school, I looked at the proposal for the first time. It more than doubled my previous salary, had built-in stock bonuses if certain conditions were met, and included a lift bonus with options for cash or common stock. Bill had already signed it. I called a business lawyer and made an appointment to have him review all the legal terms to ensure I didn't miss anything. At 10 o'clock in the morning, while I was doing laundry, there was a knock on our door. I was surprised to see a small Asian woman when I opened the door. My first thought was that I hoped it wasn't someone from a group I didn't want to deal with. Her name was Lynn Wong, better known as a gossip journalist. After introducing myself, I invited her in. "Coffee or tea?" I asked. "If you have a good strong gin, that'll do." "It's early for me, but okay," she replied. I poured it for her and, like a gentleman, opened a beer for myself. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. James," she said, "but I have a video I want to show you." I suggested that she start. I learned that this was a video recording of my conversation with Deborah. She then played a clip where my wife stated that she never intended to write a book, she wanted a retraction so she could begin an appeal against the divorce decision. "Mr. James, I need your opinion before I decide to publish this," Lynn explained. I told her to turn on her recording device and let me know when it was safe to start. She made it clear. "First of all, you can use my name. What you showed me was only part of our conversation that day. We also discussed other topics, such as our children and divorce after 18 years of marriage. Everything she told me was a lie, so I can't say she's telling the truth now," I explained. "Since everything she told me was a lie, I have to wonder if she lied to you too." I can't say I didn't lie, and that makes the situation even sadder since I was not worthy of her honesty. For me, she is not worth lying about. I hope this clears things up for you." She replied, "Yes, that clears it up," and turned off the device. I think I'll use my column to make a poll. I will write her conversation with me word for word, and below it, our conversation that we just finished. I'll ask the readers who they believe. "I'm looking forward to it," I answered sincerely. "My father always believed that if you give a man enough rope, he will eventually hang himself." Deborah confirmed he was right for her, it was all about the money she was losing. I knew it, and I think Mrs. Wong saw it too. My ex-wife called and said she wanted to take the kids to dinner. I told her they would all be home just after 4 o'clock and that she could come then. She arrived soon after that. My eldest daughter answered the door, and I heard her shout, "Our ex-mother has arrived," followed by the sound of running feet. I stayed in the kitchen, not wanting to be seen as interfering with the children's relationship with their mother. A few minutes later, I heard the front door close, and soon after, the children entered the kitchen. "It's too early, Dad," Tammy said. "Because it is," I replied. "We can't just act like everything is fine after what she did to us." I pointed out that if I did something against a friend, I would likely lose that friendship for life. "And she wants us to act like nothing happened?" "I just told her to leave us alone," Carl said. When she asked who gave me the right to say that, I mentioned my grandfather. To change the subject, I suggested going to McDonald's for dinner, and everyone agreed. After the kids finished their homework, I called Trisha and explained what happened. She said I shouldn't have been surprised, even though I hid it well. They saw how much I was hurting. It looked like Steven's legal troubles were catching up with him. He instructed his legal team to settle the case as cheaply as possible. Robert sued me for damage to his face, and after my lawyer made some changes, I signed the contract and called Bill. We agreed to announce this next Friday. I reported this to the gossip reporter. My mother decided to take the children for the weekend, and Trisha was busy with something else. I devoted my free time to finding some of the people who had left. Two whom I considered key to my turnaround plans agreed to return as soon as I showed them my new contract. If the head of HR left or was removed, I learned that they had approached her with a warning about Steven's actions, but it had been ignored. It was fascinating to read Mrs. Wong's comments after publishing our conversations word for word. She asked readers for their thoughts. She then wrote, "Meeting these two made me wonder what Deborah ever saw in Glenn. He comes across as a kind, loving, and considerate man, the type that every woman wants. Deborah is always seeking more thrills and power from those she can never find happiness with. She will be whoever you want her to be because she doesn't know herself and isn't comfortable in her skin. She wears a mask with everyone she meets." Reading this, I thought she hit the nail on the head. On Monday, I contacted an agency looking for a housekeeper from Monday to Friday. With my new salary level, I could afford it. I called the chairman of the board of directors to tell him about my discovery that they were telling the truth, which led to her being fired. While talking to Trisha that night, I asked if she knew anyone who was feeling burnt out at their job. She asked why, and I explained that I was looking for a head of HR since the current one had been let go. She said she knew two who would be perfect for the position. I told her to ask them both to contact me on Friday morning. On the last Friday of May, the chairman of the board of directors introduced me as the new president in front of the media. I told the press that our company had experienced a personnel crisis and was emerging with a new team. I introduced the two new vice presidents, explaining that both had left because of previous management's behavior. I emphasized that this kind of honesty from all our employees is what we want from now on. I introduced the new head of HR, highlighting that we were the first to hire a former social worker for this position because we wanted to develop moral and mental standards much higher than before. I asked Nora Richards, my former assistant, to stand. We are pleased to announce that Nora Richards has been appointed to the newly created position of vice president overseeing all aspects of production for our commercial team, I said. Nora received thunderous applause, sending a clear message that dedication and hard work mean something. Deborah fought the bigamy charge and lost, serving a sentence of 2 years minus 1 day. Steven settled all claims and is serving 10 years. Robert is appealing his defeat for the 3rd time. Trisha and I are dating, and the kids are encouraging us to set a wedding date. What do you think of our story? It seems to me that the main character, having found out everything that he shouldn't, was very much upset and realized that he had not lived the life he could have lived. What's your impression? Write in the comments. Until new videos.